So last Sunday we looked at Jesus' healing of the blind man, talked about eyes wide shut, having blind spots about Jesus. Today we want to look at Jesus' raising of Lazarus. And I want to read you most of chapter 11. We'll have it on screen. It's in the left column of your bulletin as well. So let's just hear the core chunk of this story. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upwards and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Amen. Over the last week, I've been involved in 3 funerals, all members of this church, friends of mine that I've known for a lot of years. Mary Gracie, Ron Euler, Bob Johnston. Bob's funeral's today at 1 o'clock. And that has got me thinking about funerals. Jesus didn't make it to the funeral of his friend Lazarus. By the time Jesus got to Bethany, Lazarus had already been entombed 3 days. And yet Jesus, fighting back tears, raises Lazarus. As we will celebrate here 2 weeks from now, Jesus Christ is the resurrection and the life. So this Sunday, today, against the backdrop of the pre-resurrection story of the raising of Lazarus, I want each of us to think about funerals. Your funeral. And the funeral of those whom you love. How many of you have heard the phrase "dead man walking"? Almost all of us. There was a movie about probably 10 or 11 years ago now, with that title, "Dead Man Walking." The phrase is used in prisons to describe inmates who are on death row, who are living with their execution looming. They are dead men, still walking. We're all dead man or woman walking. Death is inevitable for us all. Dead man walking. All funerals are responses to human need. Christian funerals are a time for us publicly to testify to our faith and our resurrection hope. Some of you may think it's a bit morbid that we're talking about funerals on Sunday morning. Perhaps we Christians overlook what we have, how wonderful it is in this often death-denying world that we can speak about and do it with a measure of anticipation and joy, that we can speak about the reality of our death, that we can look ahead to the inevitability, not with a sense of resignation or of hopelessness, but as another opportunity out ahead. And the funeral is our opportunity to show what we believe to the world. So I propose that today we reflect upon the funeral. Jesus went to Lazarus' grave. Jesus, I'm sure, went to a lot of funerals. Let's us think about what we want our funerals to be in the light of our faith. I want to propose 6 things. Some of them I'm going to burn through really fast. Some of them I'll take a little time with. The first one is proclamation. I think every funeral should be a proclamation. The promise is that Christians are traveling toward the resurrection hope. We need to proclaim. We need to share with the world at our funerals what we have, what we hold to, and what we have out ahead. We proclaim that we are joining the communion of saints, not simply at a funeral, not just recollecting pleasant memories from the life of the deceased, although we do that. The gospel should be proclaimed at a funeral, not in theory, but as a seen experience in the life of the person. And last week when I did Mary Gracie's funeral, and this on Wednesday, Ron Euler's, and this afternoon with Bob's, I knew them all, and I know their connectedness and their faith. And so I can joyfully proclaim to the folks there. And that really needs to be heard, because people you would never think have any connection to God or have any yearning for God, it's there in the most surprising situations. People need to hear this hope. Back in the 80s, George Bush Sr., not W., his father, George Bush Sr., was vice president of the U.S. Ronald Reagan was president. There was a death in Russia. Leonid Brezhnev, the Communist Party leader, and Vice President Bush was sent to represent the United States. The funeral was as precise and stoic as the communist regime. No tears were seen, no emotion displayed, no hint of faith or eternity. With one exception. Mr. Bush told how Brezhnev's widow was the last person to witness the body. The casket was laid out, huge stadium and crowd, and Brezhnev's widow was allowed to come forward just before they closed the casket. And Vice President Bush was sitting in the front row with a number of state dignitaries. Mrs. Brezhnev stood over the body, and only the front row could see this, and then she reached down and marked the sign of the cross on her husband's chest. Stunning moment. In the hour of her husband's demise, this woman went not to Khrushchev or Stalin or Lenin or Karl Marx. She went to a Nazarene carpenter 2,000 years ago who had said, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." That's our faith, and people cling to it even when it is outlawed in their regime for 3 generations. We need to proclaim that always. The gospel of God's power and God's love, especially at our funerals. Something else a funeral should be is an offering. And this has nothing to do with money. We're not talking finances here. A good funeral affords an opportunity for people to offer to God what they bring to that worship. At a funeral, we primarily offer back to God the one who has died, but we also offer God our thanksgiving and our memories and our emotions and even ourselves. We just open ourselves and give everything to God in offering. Thirdly, church. A funeral is for the whole church, and I love doing a funeral right here. Mary Gracie's was here last Saturday, and I've done a lot of them, of dear friends, long-time members here. In the last year, Betty Park, Herma Bailey, some of you remember these names and knew them. It's a chance for the church, the people of God, to come together in a powerful, good way, with some grief that we've lost someone, but also with celebration. Because the church has walked alongside this person. They've been part of us. We've borne one another's burdens. And now we walk with them through their time of death. It's the church together at its best. Fourth, therapeutic. A funeral should be therapeutic. A good funeral helps heal the broken hearts of the mourners. And it does so by placing the sadness of death into the context, the big picture of the gospel story. Grief requires not just compassion, but our grief is so deep and profound at times, it also requires a restoration of relationship. We need to hold on to the connection that we feel is lost, and restoration of meaning. We need to know the one we've lost, their life has continuing meaning and purpose in us and beyond. I have a really good friend. She's a chaplain in a hospital in New York City. Her name's Melody. Her and her husband, their cottage is next door to ours. And Melody and I and Dan, we talk all the time because we're all clergy. Melody works in a huge hospital in New York City, 700 beds. She deals with as many as 1,000 families a year whom a loved one is dying or has died. She's the hospital chaplain. And Melody said to me, and I'm thinking about this therapeutic thing, she said, there are 5 things every family needs to say and people need to say at a funeral. Some of you have heard me talk about these at a funeral because I use this frequently if I'm doing a funeral here in Burlington. Melody gave me these 5 things to say. All of us need to say, thank you to whoever the deceased is. All of us need to say, I love you. All of us need to say, there's a lot that goes in between these, but I can't unpack them right now. But we need to say thank you. We need to say, I love you. We need to say, I'm sorry. Because you and I both know we messed up at times. We also need to say, I forgive you. Because you and I both know they messed up at times. And lastly, we need to say goodbye. A good Christian funeral, you can do those 5. Thank you, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, goodbye. Not necessarily in that order, and maybe not out loud. Maybe you just write a letter. Maybe you say it silently, here and here. But if we're healthy followers of Jesus, we need to be able to say those things to the one we've loved and lost a little while. Fifthly, commemorative. Funerals in our age have really changed. I've been doing funerals for 35 years, and there's a shift, and I've seen it. Whereas funerals once were a time for people of faith to gather and to reaffirm what we believe about God and our dying, more and more funerals have been made almost exclusively not about God, but about us, about our grief or about our memories. Sometimes people say, well, funerals are mostly for the living, and who would deny that? Of course they are. But I'm saying, if they're really going to be about us and helpful to us, we need to get ourselves into a connectedness with the eternal. It can't just be looking back at the life of the person's gone. It's got to be in the big context, the big picture. That's healthy. If you only look back at what's past and tell funny stories, you're going to walk out still feeling this small grief. It's over. And nothing more. Funerals need to be commemorative, but they need to be connecting as well. It's clear to me that Christian funerals at one time were mostly about God. In the funeral, we give back to God the life that had been given to us. And we see the funeral as a time of worship, of focusing on God in the context of this life and giving it back, saying thank you, and saying all those other things. Now, focusing upon ourselves, too often funerals have only hilarious joke and storytelling, but not, and that's good. I want to do that, but it's not enough. So I'm not advocating for morbid, exclusively somber funerals, but I am thankful that we have more to say in a Christian funeral. We have more to say than simply what a great person the deceased was. We get to say not only positive things about the deceased, but also what a great God our Christian God is. And that needs to be a huge part of the story and the experience. While a funeral as a service of worship is for more than eulogizing the dead, we never forget that a real person has died, a specific individual, and we do remember and celebrate their life. But we do it in this big context of the Creator God who loves us and came for us. Lastly, I want to say a good Christian funeral should be evangelistic. Now, I'm not talking about Billy Graham and altar calls and all of that. But I'm almost cycling back to the first thing I said, proclamation. As is true of all services of worship, a Christian funeral is a gathering of faithful people testifying to our faith, testifying to everyone including those who don't have faith. We're testifying what we believe about God. We show to everyone what we believe, and in doing that, we hope we're planting seeds of faith and hope in them. When I was a little kid, one of my heroes was Mickey Mantle. When Mickey the Hall of Fame baseball player, was dying of diseases brought on by a life of heavy drinking, he said this. He said, "I would have taken better care of myself if I'd known I was going to live this long." The Mick gives us a profound lesson. How should we take care of ourselves when we are going to live forever? When we know our lives are never going to cease? Jesus shows us, we his apprentices, he shows us how to live in the light of the fact that we will never stop living. We need to have this dual vision. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, "From now on, we regard no one from an earthly point of view." In our world, the trend is completely opposite to that. I live about 300 yards as the crow flies from Chapters on Fairview there. If you went out their front door and went straight across Fairview into the subdivision, I live over there, so I can get to go over to Chapters, and there's a Starbucks there anytime I want. And I go in there and look at the magazine racks, and you look at the covers of all the magazines. What are people buying? What are they reading? What are they interested in? Net Worth, Business Week, Forbes magazine, Body Shape and Muscle Tone, Men's Health. I don't know what the women's magazines are on that, but some of you could tell me. Beauty Secrets, Possessions, Power Boats, all of those things, they're transitory. I've attended and conducted my share of funerals, probably about closing in on 1,000 now in 35 years. Not once, never, have I heard friends and family members speak about and eulogize the deceased's luxury car or surround sound stereo system, or the shape or size of their nose or bank account. Instead, when we get to the funeral, we talk about the qualities like kindness and generosity and love for family and care for friends, sometimes even stretching the truth, as if conceding that in the end, only those qualities last. But left alone, we humans too often make judgments based on the surface appearance, physical appearance, career, income. And here's the thing. Here's what we need to proclaim. Here's what we need to evangelize, witness to. Jesus entered our world to establish a society based on something completely different, something that lasts. What we sometimes emphasize way too late at the funeral, Jesus set as the baseline of what's important and what we should be living. Jesus' vision of life, it doesn't make sense in this world's value system. Cultural attitudes encourage us to look out for number one, to compete, to demand equal treatment, to protect ourselves, to build a secure nest egg, to minimize risk, and to amuse ourselves to death. All attitudes that Jesus directly contradicts. Instead, he recasts life on this planet from the perspective of two worlds. And you've got to have dual vision. Jesus' words seem revolutionary to us only because we think like people who are only going to live 70 or 90 years. Jesus introduced a whole new way of thinking, raising our sights to a life that extends into eternity and involves unseen worlds we don't have the capacity to detect or imagine. Jesus came to establish an alternative community centered on values that are invisible to this world, centered on earth as it is in heaven. Two worlds. Seen in that light, faith and friendship with God can lead us to a way of life that focuses on what matters most and lasts longest. We begin during this earthly lifetime to be shaped by that, to live with that vision, an alternative worldview. We never completely achieve it here. I'd be lying if I said any of us in this room is perfect. But many people are influenced by these alternative values, the lifestyle of a different ruler, the kingdom of heaven, the reign of God. And that's what we can proclaim and live out, even at a funeral. I hope you'll ponder these matters now before death visits your family or before your own death is imminent. As your minister, I encourage you to welcome the opportunity to think about your funeral. We think these things and make these plans always against the backdrop of a story we know is true. Jesus Christ is the Lord of life, the one who, just as he raised Lazarus, we believe shall one day raise us. Thanks be to God. Amen.